Welcome to my series on the Encyclopedia of Chess Miniatures. I will be reviewing games 6 through 10 today, and we will be stopping or pausing at the pivotal moments in the miniatures to see if we can elucidate why mistakes were made and maybe identify patterns that we can remember and carry with us to our own playing. Okay, and you will see we keep the evaluation meter up as a visual cue to help us know, hey, this is a focal point of the match without seeing what the moves were that were played so that we can do a little bit of analysis on our own. And let's begin. Okay, so nothing extraordinary yet. This one is for those who've never seen this, I'm personally familiar with this one. This is a King's Gambit opening, and the idea, at first, this looks bad because if, as we recall, there's this open diagonal on the king's side, and that opens you up to checks from the enemy queen. However, the key piece involved in legitimizing this opening is the knight going here. Because when the knight goes here, it covers these two squares, and that will stop any of the shenanigans that black might otherwise, hit white with. So what I would be looking for on white's next move is this here. But instead they capture the pawn. Okay. So this is a mistake. This is a mistake. And so I guess we get to see the repercussions of not implementing this knight on f3, right? So if you don't do knight f3 and instead you do something like this, let's see what happened to black in this case. So the queen came out, checked the king. The natural inclination that most people would have is to probably block the check. I guess you could also move the king out of the way, but that feels really bad too, right? So let's analyze. So if the pawn goes forward, what happens? Take a pause if you'd like. So let's analyze it. So if pawn goes forward, queen's attacked. Queen takes this pawn with check. That would be one path. King then has to, well, can't move, so you have to block it with something. So that means you're either doing a block with the bishop or the knight, or perhaps even the queen, right? So the problem with that is then this diagonal is now open, and the queen can then come and take your rook. So I think that in my earlier time playing the King's Gambit, I actually ran into this exact pattern. So this is definitely a trap. Okay, so that was analyzing the blocking of the queen. If instead we move out of the check, queen takes, and the queen is covering, basically these squares, right? Like there's none of these can be walked towards by the king, right? And then this bishop is covering that square. So basically that becomes mate. Okay, so white chose to move the king, queen took the pawn, and that's the end. That's mate. So bottom line, for my takeaway on this this specific game, is the moment you choose to play this move right here, you have to be mentally thinking that the next time you get a chance, you really should be playing knight f3. Let's go ahead and see if the engine agrees right here. So at this very moment, if we were to take a look for a second, should be recommending knight f3. There you go. So if you don't play knight f3, um, you lose your advantage as white. So that initial tempo you have is basically lost. And the next strongest move, it says, is knight c3, which does not inherently protect you from getting into some of these shenanigans. Now, this one isn't quite as bad because you could just block this time and the queen doesn't have a way to take back. But it's a little bit more dicey because you're still, now you've got a pawn pinned to your king. So, all right. Moving on to game number 7. So we are now going to see a game that favors white in the end. So knight f3, d5, c4. So this would be, is this a Benoni, I think? Because if you, ready opening, okay, gotcha. Yeah, I'm taking a look up here. All right. So this move right here is, I think this warrants some analysis. So why does this move, which looks pretty natural, why does this move give away white's advantage? So what should they have done? Like, why is this bad? So one thing I'm looking at is perhaps something as simple as just take. Like at the moment, this is technically free material, and yes, white will recapture it by, perhaps by doing something like, this. But then you get into business where black can further support their pawn. Um, yeah, I'm curious if, let's take a look at the engine on this one and see. Okay, so D takes C4 is the recommendation, and then bishop G2. So it really is just about the material in this case. So this is why the evaluation meter swung the way it did. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so here is another pivotal moment. Why is this bad for black? This looks pretty decent because what we're doing is black is recapturing the pawn and becoming, like a even in material, right? So this looks like a neutralizing type of move. If you'd like to pause at this point, go ahead. So what I'm looking at is this move. And at first, this looks like it hangs a pawn because the bishop can recapture it with no threat to the bishop, and they save their knight. However, this looks pretty good to me still. This is one of the patterns we saw in the first video on games 1 through 5. So we have a check, and yes, they can, block it or do whatever they're going to do, like develop the knight perhaps. But then you've got a free bishop sitting there waiting. And so now we're up 3 points for no, yeah, nothing in return. There's no advantage that black gained. In fact, the development that white has is arguably better now because there was a wasted tempo on the bishop that's no longer on the playing field. Looks like that is where the game ends, but the solution that I just showed, I am confident in, so we will move on. Okay, moving on to game 8. This is in white's favor. So e4, c5. So this is the Sicilian defense. Okay, we got knight f3, d6. Okay, so this move I'm just looking at, like, what is it functionally doing for black? So we're opening up lines, but we're also opening up the king again. So that is something to be aware of. So you probably will want to do, if you choose to use this. I'm not an expert in the Sicilian defense. It's got a lot of lines, but I would imagine this is something that people have to be cognizant of. So if white develops this pawn pretty soon, that allows the queen to start playing some games, or the bishop perhaps. Okay. So white is claiming their stake in the center, and black might be tempted to recapture. I'm trying to think about whether that would be good or bad. You don't want white to establish a center. So ideally, you want to disrupt it, because there is this battle for central control, and to some extent the secondary central squares, like this zone. Okay. So black decides not to challenge that, and instead looks like they're setting themselves up for a fianchetto. So this is a mistake based on the evaluation gauge, a pretty substantial one, like a game-ending move. So this move right here is a mistake, and the question we have to ask ourselves is why. Okay, so I'm going to do some analysis in this and see if I can figure this one out too. I'll clear the arrow here. Okay, so if white, so what I'm looking at is you've got open diagonals for the king and the rook. Those are really the only areas that are drawing my attention. So the question is how can we take advantage of those? Queen is still locked in. So the bishop's got moves like this, but that doesn't seem so great. You've got ways to kind of prevent some of that. However, if we could get our queen here, then we could take the rook, because there'd be no way to properly defend it, because you couldn't use the bishop or the knight because they would be hanging as well. So if we reverse engineer that for a second, we do something like take, let's see, if that pawn takes, that kind of disrupts things a little bit. Then the best option is, you can't put the queen here because then this queen can take you back. So in that case, you just take the queen and get rid of the castling rights for that king. I mean, that's a pretty decent advantage. I'm trying to see what follow-up moves you'd have there. So that's one idea. Another one is pawn takes, then you got the queen, and now you've got your capture move set up on the following one. So it seems like the strongest response is take, and then black's strongest is probably this one. Okay, let's see what happens. Take. Okay, so black chose to take with the other pawn. And okay, cool. So that is the combination that was played. I'm curious right here at this very moment, though, this take, for me, I calculated that I thought this was stronger. for black to mitigate some of the damage. Let's find out if the engine agrees. So what we're looking for is d takes c5. Interesting. So it looks like the strongest response is actually e6. Oh, wow. What a great refutation. So it's still white's game right now, but e6 is great because if this move is played, it covers this square. This is one of the areas that I think is fundamental to club level chess players, myself being one of them, is the constant second guessing of yourself and checking for stronger refutations by your opponent. This moment right here is a great reminder of that. So e6, and then bishop b5 check, and then bishop d7. So yeah, we get into just basic defense, but the key thing here is neither of these moves was actually a good idea. I am curious though, if we compare the situation for a minute. So if we compare this, which was played in the game, we get an evaluation of about 4.7, 4.6, 4.5. Okay, 4.5. We're starting to stabilize. Versus, I thought this one was a better move. Okay, yep, that at least tracks. So 2.9, 3.0 advantage for white. So it's not nearly as strong an advantage. But my calculation was this move to remove castling rights, and it looks like there was also an option to do, at least consider this one. Yep. Okay. All right. Moving right along. That was how this one ended right here. Okay, moving on to game number 9. So we got d4, c5. Takes. So this is opening up the bishop for the recapture. And of course, just natural development. So one thing I've noticed in some of my own playing as I've progressed as well is when I find myself getting into a greedy situation where I've got this pawn that's out in the playing field and I'm up one pawn, and then I start making moves like this to try to hold on to that advantage. Oftentimes I find that this doesn't work out in my favor because I'm all of a sudden throwing all my structure, my positional thinking into the trash can in exchange for a single pawn. So let's see if this works or not for white. I mean, we see in the evaluation meter that this ends up being a game in favor of black, but perhaps it has nothing to do with this. Okay, so black is undermining the base of this pawn chain. So if allowed, takes, and then takes, right? So that's the idea there. So white responds with this pawn. And that looks pretty natural too, right? You're like, okay, well, if you take this, I take this. And now I still have support for this pawn. The problem is this move right here looks to be a mistake. So let's try to figure out, why is this a mistake? So if I am black, how do I capitalize on this mistake. Okay, so it looks like, this move really only has one purpose, right? It's to recapture if black decides to do this, right? So let's make the assumption that this plays out exactly in that way, right? So if takes takes, what does black do to capitalize now? And what I'm looking at is this piece right here. So what happens if the queen goes here? So white needs to do something. They can't move the rook out of the way. They can't defend with the bishop, it would be hanging. They can't defend with the knight, it would be hanging. They can't defend with the queen, it would be hanging. So I think that's the pattern that we're looking for in this case, is this open diagonal. So when these pieces are basically undeveloped on the queen side, if this diagonal is open, that is the general pattern that I think we're looking for. Yeah. So that's how this played out in the game. And that's a pretty easy one to understand. It kind of reminds me, it's like, how we talked about like when you're on the king side and you've got the open diagonal, right? With undeveloped pieces and stuff. Like, it's the same sort of scenario, except on the queen side it endangers the rook in the corner. All right, let's move on to our final game for this video. And we will begin. So knight f3, d5, c4 takes, e3 with the intent to recapture. Knight f6. There's the recapture with development, so that's great. So here is a pivotal moment. So black just played what looks to be a pretty natural move, pinning the knight to the queen. And this turns out to be a mistake. It gives a much bigger advantage to white. So feel free to pause right here. Okay, so I am looking at a few different ideas. So one is, if the queen goes here, we've got a queen bishop combo pointing at the f7 square, which is a tender spot on the black side. Secondarily, this queen then puts an attack on the b7 pawn, which is also another tender spot once the bishop has left its home starting spot. That seems like a pretty strong initial move here. So if I'm black in this case, let's start this again. I go like this. If I'm black, my biggest priority is probably preventing this. So I'm going to do something like this to open up my bishop for development and protect this square. So one idea then is queen then takes, and with the threat of taking the rook on the following move, this knight needs to get out of there. And the only safe square to develop is neither of these. It would be this one. So knight goes here. So thus far, all we've done is we've gained a pawn. So the question is there anything more to be had at this moment? It seems like a pretty strong move. The other thing I'll note is this knight is now not actually it's not actually pinned anymore. So it does maybe open up an opportunity to do something, like this, trying to add pressure here, but with this pawn now being here, I'm not sure. So let's just see how this plays out. I feel like this is probably the strongest initial response from white. Oh, completely did not see. Here we go. Did not calculate that. This square is, as I was saying, a tender spot. And really, it's, hey, this is a queen sack. Beautiful. So if the bishop takes, then, so basically if this, then this. So bishop can't take the queen. They need to do something about this move. And the only thing they really can do is pretty much this move. And we have now two pieces attacking. So the response would obviously be black goes like this, and then the knight just takes. And if the knight recaptures, then the queen recaptures. So that is that's the plan here, and that's why this is bad for black. Okay, so black decided to play a different refutation where he moved the piece out of the capture zone while also providing protection. So another case where I didn't immediately calculate that, but it's kind of irrelevant because you can just take this, and if the knight takes, it doesn't change the situation here. Because the key thing to note is this is a checkmate pattern with the knight. So if the knight guards these two squares, right, and the other pieces are not developed, then if you throw a bishop really on either corner, it's a checkmate pattern. So yeah, queen took, and that's the end of it. So yeah, very instructive miniature. And if I'm being honest with myself, would I have seen this right at this, this move right here? Because my eyes were just drawn to this more typical move. This is okay, but it does not really do that much in comparison to this move, right? And if we were to take a look at the difference in evaluation value, obviously we know one is forcing, so it's going to be worth a lot more. But let's take a look. So queen b3 looks like it's a top 3 move, but you can see the evaluation difference looks to still be, at least, about 1.2, 1.3 difference between queen b3 and, oh, look at that. So they were recommending 95, right? Which looks beautiful, but there's actually something even more forcing. So bishop takes, king then takes, knight then checks, and then king has to move, and then knight takes the bishop. So that's kind of interesting. So here, let's visualize that just to kind of take a look. So the bishop came in, checked the king, king took, knight checked, king went back, knight took, and now the game moves on. So that one is, I guess, more valuable. Interesting. I don't know that I favor that one as much as the one that was chosen in the game. I kind of like this one. It's more elegant. All right. Well, I hope you have enjoyed games 6 through 10, and maybe there was even some new patterns in here. So until next time, take care.